Good afternoon. Calling to order the Oklahoma City Board of Adjustment meeting for April the 21st, 2016. Our first order of business is to receive the minutes of the April 7th, 2016 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Register your vote. Minutes are received. Next order of business is continuous request or withdrawal request from staff.
We have item number 6, case number 14198, is asking for withdrawal, the Oklahoma City Housing Redevelopment.
Move approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. That case is withdrawn. Any continuous or withdrawal requests from the public today? Hearing none, John, let's proceed with our first case.
Item number 1, case number 14209, request of Robert Manley for a variance to the minimum building height requirement of 3 stories or 50 feet on all street frontages and the construction of the building within 10 feet of the street right-of-way in the downtown business district located at 406 Southwest 7th.
Welcome. Give us your name and address for the record.
My name is Robert Manley. I work for Jacobs Engineering. My address is 1919 Bryan Street, Dallas, Texas.
Very good. Go ahead and speak to your application.
Haven't done this before, so. Is that the case number?
No, just tell us what you want to do.
Oh, okay. We have a streetcar maintenance facility that is located at 7th and Hudson. It's a unusual and kind of a unique building. It's different than what is typically in the downtown area. The 2 variances that we're seeking are for the location of the building on the site, and that is really perpetrated by the way that the streetcar vehicles have to come into the facility. Our streetcar vehicles will come down Hudson, turn in off of Hudson just past 7th, and in order to get into the maintenance bay and the storage bays, we have to have the building far enough back on the site. So that's kind of where we end up with greater than 10 feet. The height of the building, we only need about 8,000 square feet for office spaces and about 15,000 square feet for maintenance bays, enclosed maintenance bays and wash bay. The height of the building we would actually have to add a floor that would be a completely unused space in the facility. So that's why we're seeking to be able to not use the restriction of 50 feet, and the highest point on our building right now is the back maintenance bays, which is about 30 feet high. It's actually 29 and a half. This is, we've designed the facility so that it will be expandable in the future, and it meets everything else. We've done a complete DDRC review, have essentially checked all the boxes, made sure that we are compliant, except for these 2 items. So we're asking that we be granted a variance on that. Any questions?
Questions by board members? Is there anybody else present here to speak on this case?
This is for the streetcars for the city of Oklahoma City that are going to be installed?
That's correct. Yes. This is the maintenance facility for the streetcars.
I'm surprised that this building is in, I shouldn't say that. It's in the DVD, but it's not really within the DVD. And having seen some of those cases before, I understand why the ordinance is in place. Seems pretty clear that on the fringe here, that ordinance is not being, discredited by this application. And it seems to me pretty clear, unless there's something I'm missing that another board member wants to bring up, that the 4 standards are pretty much met, or are met. So I don't have any objection to it. I'd move approval unless there's other discussion.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the variance request on case number 1. Please register your vote. You are approved. Thank you.
Item number 2, case number 14210, request of Frank Bruno for a variance to the required number of parking spaces and maneuvering in the right-of-way in the C3 Community Commercial District located at 3710 Northwest Western Avenue.
Is the applicant or his representative present today? Yes. Okay. If you would, we'll speak one at a time, so the rest of you can just sit there in the front row and go ahead and give us your name and address for the record and speak to your application.
My name is Richard Starks. My address is 411 North Monroe, Blanchard, Oklahoma. And I'm the architect for the project.
Tell us what you want to do.
Okay, so as you can see, where C3 is the tenant space. To the left of that, they have parking that's, off-street. Some of it, they do have maneuvering room, but it's on the right-of-way, and I think that's what one of the variances is asking. And then we have some photos. I don't know if we can hand those.
You can hand those to John and he'll pass it.
They show other areas along Western within a half mile that have the exact same, parking situation, and even across the street. And that's the basics of it, is just trying to get the parking that's been there for 60 years, a variance for that to allow the project to move forward. And we have the building, representative of the building owner and the tenant as well, if you'd like to hear from them.
One of these pictures, sorry to interrupt you, one of these pictures, is this a picture of Will Rogers Theater and Lobby Bar and all that area, Sushi Nico and all that?
Yes.
Okay. And you guys, okay, all right.
Of course, one of the issues for us is the additional required parking for this use, and the fact that parking is already scarce in that area.
Okay. So we have an article also. I believe it's from 1978. And it kind of shows that, they've been willing to work with the parking problem. And there was a little strip along Western that they were granted to kind of help alleviate that problem. And we also have a shared parking agreement that he can use for all of the tenants in the space, which would include all the way up on the north side, of the complex. And then there's a few spots in the rear, right where the 3 is on the property, in the C3. And then there's also a few parking spaces that this agreement would include that are on the very southeast corner of the property that's on the other side of the alley.
Are these parking spaces that were all accounted for when you submitted your permit?
Not these on the southeast corner.
Okay. Do you know why those weren't counted?
I didn't realize we were going to have an issue with it, actually, but with the shared parking agreement, we included those in that. So,
Mr. Chairman, I had posed a number of questions to staff about this corner and the parking, and I would ask them to, first of all, my first question was, how much, if any, of the parking actually along Western is public parking?
All that area over on Bruno's side, all the cars that are up there, that's all in the public way.
Okay, so that's all public parking?
Yes.
And is it the same on the west side of the street?
Over on the west side, it's a smaller right-of-way. They're partially on, the back end of the vehicles would be on the right-of-way, but most of the vehicles are on private property. They do maneuver into the right-of-way, though.
We have this. So it's not public parking. There are places along Western, further north, that I'm more familiar with, but I thought also along this strip that the parking itself is actually public parking as opposed to private parking. Although the city tends to treat it as if it belongs to the businesses that it's in front of, in fact, it's public parking. And is that true here, JJ? On both sides?
Well, Bruno's is clearly all within the right-of-way, so it's public parking. On the Caulk of the Walk side, those spaces are on private property, but for just a small tail end of the spaces.
So part of the parking is public.
Yeah.
Well, but those spaces, even if they're public parking, can be accounted for when they submit their permit, right? Because those are available parks that support that use. Is that true or no?
No, they can't count any of the parking that doesn't meet current code.
So do you mind, can you explain to me, and especially since he's pointing to parking that wasn't considered when they submitted for their permit, can you show me where they were coming up with their parking spaces to begin with then, if they weren't counting those?
Well, there are, what did we say, 44 spaces that are around the site. There are the spaces in the front on the right-of-way. There are spaces in a north parking lot on the north end of the building, and there's 5 or 6 spaces behind the building.
So the empty area along the north, there is kind of that area just to the east and north of the sign is Bruno's property, correct?
Yes.
And that's where they're coming up with a lot of their private parks that they submitted for their permit.
Well, they really don't have any parking to apply to this permit.
Well, that's kind of what I
Because the
thought.
whole,
That's what I
all
was
their
getting at.
parking is non-conforming. They don't meet their parking requirement for what they have now.
That's
And
kind of what I...
that is typical of these older, small, commercial
Yeah.
nodes that are all over Ward 2. They don't have dedicated parking. So the next question I had was, have there been variances granted on either side of Western here, either through the Board of Adjustment or through the PUD or SPUD process, or even as part of an ABC overlay, where we have waived or varied or whatever sort of non-technical term you want to use to allow parking?
The PUD, Caulk of the Walk, it allows just what parking they had. So
That
in the
was what I
PUD, it allowed what they already
We
had.
just deem it to be sufficient is what we call that, right?
Yes.
Whatever it is whatever it is.
Basically, they're asking for the same consideration that the Caulk of the Walk has.
Okay, and so then, next question I had was, do we have, I mean, we, at Planning Commission, we deal with this all the time. So do we have an actual policy statement about this, JJ? You know, this is a situation that exists, you know, along 23rd Street, down the Plaza District, certainly further north along Western. And, you know, these are areas that the city is, you know, actively invested in trying to promote and redevelop and you know, supporting in all kinds of financial and, you know, staff resources ways. And yet, you know, this is just simply a fact of life in these areas. There isn't enough parking to meet our current code requirements. So I wanted you all to be aware of that. Do we have a policy, a written policy?
No, we don't. We just, you know, and each situation is so different, we have to just look at them on a case-by-case basis.
I have a question on the strip parking agreement. Is that the old grocery store parking lot that's on across the street from Chum? Across the street from United Methodist Church, that used to be a grocery store there, right? So that's what you're talking about. How many spaces will that be? I'm just curious.
21 spaces along the street.
And then 5 behind.
North Parking has 20 as well. So you have 41 spaces that are the front and the side. But they're not compliant as far as the size, maneuverability, and things of that nature. But the business has been there for 60 years operating. At one time had 5 tenants in it, and they all operated under that parking.
As well as residential upstairs. Okay.
I'm going to ask, when you have to speak, you'll need to approach the microphone. Okay.
And then there is on the survey, according to the surveyor, the parking that's off the street, there's a 21-foot strip that they were granted a long time ago. I don't know the exact date. But that this is 1978. And that strip cuts, like if you're looking at the parking, half of the parking space would be on their property and half of the parking space would be on the right-of-way. So it cuts the spaces in half. So it's kind of a split.
The other question I had was whether the variance that is being sought here today applies only to the proposed restaurant site, or are we, sort of writing a blank check here for the entirety of that block from 36 to 37?
Only the restaurant.
Okay. This is one of those things, parking along Western is a huge problem, and it has been, and it remains, and it will continue to be. And hopefully it'll get to be a worse of a problem because this will be a really vibrant, exciting area that a lot of people will come to. But the reality is that the parking that's there is what's there. We do not want to encourage or promote the idea that people should go out and acquire any of the residential properties that surround these commercial uses and tear them down and make parking lots out of them. I don't anticipate that anything like the commercial property to the south of this across 36th Street is going to be, given up to parking. It sits empty at the moment because what was on it burnt down. But, the fact that parking is difficult is just a thing. This is really an area that is designed as neighborhood commercial. The hope is that with the promotion of a pedestrian streetscape and making all of that, facilitating all of that into the future, that more people will leave their cars at home and walk to these kinds of uses. But, I think if ever there was a situation where, the hardship, the use of a building for its intended and proper use cannot, be accomplished because it can't meet the requirements of the ordinance, in this case, the parking ordinance, this is one of those. So, is there anyone else who wants to be heard?
I would invite the others that have joined you. If you have something new to add, please give us your name and address for the record. Pull the microphone down so we can hear you well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm representing my dad, Frank Bruno. I'm Gina Bruno Den. I'm 1925 Northwest 56, Oklahoma City. I just was representing my father. He was not able to be here. He's in a wheelchair. He's 91, and he's owned the property for, well, I guess he was in business there for 54 years. So we've always utilized the same parking, and that article is actually when he acquired the parking on the front side, on the western side, and that was just part so that he could control the parking because, like, at that time, we had 5 businesses, TGNY, Dave Mirrors, there was a hardware store, a cleaners, and then my father's store was in the first 2 buildings. And he acquired that parking just to control the parkings for our tenants since it was kind of getting overpowered by the Clock at the Walk and the bar, so to speak. And so we've worked with them over this past 50 years, and since I can remember, we allow them to use our parking after we close at 6 p.m. And in this proposal, even for the coffee shop that we would love to put in that 3rd building, they're going to offer breakfast and lunch, so it would be same use, daytime use, and then again, we would still be courteous in adding the parking for the tenants across the street. And we feel like we have ample parking. I mean, there's plenty of spaces. The church we also have a church now in that 6th building, and so all of the tenants are aware of that, so they are compliant that they use that entire parking lot on Sundays, and then at 11:30 the parking lot's empty again, and then the retail starts. So I feel like we've been very selective in the businesses that are there, and we've always worked together for the last 54 years. And my dad, he's 91, so he wanted to come and speak and, say, we've used that parking, and he was going on and on. But he's just really excited about the future of the property, and he didn't understand what this was all about, because he was like, well, we've always had parking. It's community parking. We always share it with all the tenants. We're all in agreement. If the furniture store's busy, then they park all the way up. So, and we've just always had it that way. And we feel like there's ample parking to maintain and, for the restaurant as well. And as you spoke, you're right on plan. On Saturdays and Fridays are obviously the busiest days, and the majority of the people do walk, and they come from the park, and they go to the park, and they have their dogs, and they're walking. And that's kind of what we'd like to grow in that community, along with, the Boys and Girls Club. They have basketball games there, and they all walk over, shop. We'd love to have them have a cup of coffee, eat, and hang out, and that's kind of what we're looking for.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
comments.
There's no question that there's a lot of growing pains involved in this parking sharing thing, and I would certainly encourage all of you to play nice.
Yes, my name is Mark Burkell. I reside at 906 Northwest 37th Street, Oklahoma City. I'm the proposed tenant, Brickster's Coffee Cafe, that we're looking at putting in the location. It's a 3,800 square foot coffee shop that will obviously give full coffee and have a full slate of breakfast and lunch choices. I just wanted, for the record, we were only needing 39 spots for the city to grant us our construction permit, and they denied us our construction permit due to saying the 39 spots were either backing across in the maneuvering way or not the right size. The Bruno's Properties, I have a signed property agreement with Bruno's Properties that allows me to use their parking, which gives me my 39 spots. We're here today, obviously, for the variance to hopefully grant us, the 39 spots, which are already there and already been in use for over 60 years. So that's all I want to state.
Thank you very much. Board members, you're aware of the letters of protest from some adjacent property owners. Is there anybody else here present that wishes to speak on this matter? Board members, do you have questions or comments for the applicant?
I had one question. Granting of this variance, would that expand any noncompliance with respect to expand the nonconformity or any issue regarding that? No.
JJ, the current use, the current application they're applying for is for restaurant use, right? I mean, that's why they need the variance. Is there anything, once this variance is granted, to keep the type of restaurant that's being put in at this location from changing to something that's more dinner and bar-like? And because C3 allows for those uses.
No, there's not.
So once they have the parking variance for the restaurant use, they could essentially put any kind of restaurant or bar with or without alcohol sales. I mean, hypothetically, we'd be opening the door for that.
Limited
a bar.
to that, yeah, not bar, but limited to that 3,000 square feet, any type of restaurant.
Which could serve alcohol, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And currently, in order for them to do that, they would have to go and get an ABC for the property. So there would still be a process.
Well, I'll play the other side to Janice's comments, I guess. My concern is, even though parking is evil, there have been lots of developers spend lots of money to provide adequate parking to allow for these types of uses. It's pretty ironic that the Will Rogers Group was included in that. They have a massive parking lot behind their facility for events. Most people don't realize that they also have a massive parking lot on the backside of Musashi's. Call me crazy, but I bet, and JJ Per, you can submit a permit as long as you provide a joint kind of parking agreement or access agreement. They can use spaces from one restaurant to another to help if they're short on those kinds of matters, right?
If they're on the same piece of property.
That's what I mean. So they can use those types. So there's all kinds of solutions to these problems. 23rd Street, since you mentioned it, is another great example. People went in and had to put those parking lots in. When you have these types of uses in these kinds of areas, it's just a necessary evil. And I think it's very wishful, but it's not very practical to say that at some point in the future, everybody's going to be walking and bicycling to get to these things. At the end of the day, they're still driving cars, and I don't see that changing anytime in the near term. And you've got neighborhoods around here that we don't want to see destroyed or denigrated, and yet if we allow these types of uses to infringe on their peripheral I promise you, good homeowners who are trying to keep their properties up are not going to take kindly to further infringing vehicles parked in these neighborhoods in front of their houses and their driveways and other things like that. So I think my caution here is that unless we believe that the applicant has convinced us that given the surrounding uses that are being allowed currently, that expanding their use to this is not going to create more problems, I think we need to be very cautious about this. I'm typically not in favor of, I'm not against people trying to use their property in whatever way they see fit. That's not the issue here for me. It's that this is a very tight area with very limited parking, and even though no one's here, which I'm surprised about, there's obviously a lot of strong feelings in this area about the parking that's shared between you guys. They don't echo your sentiment in their letters. So it concerns me that we're going to potentially open up this door for exacerbating an already growing problem. And since the existing parking operates in maneuvering into a right-of-way on a primary arterial, we're going to make that problem worse too if we allow that to expand without forcing them to add parking.
The maneuvering thing is really not such a big deal in front of the Bruno's property. I don't know if you're that familiar with it, but there is a curb that runs along the east side of the actual street. So these cars are not backing out into the street. They may be backing onto right-of-way.
Well, sure, but you're arguably going to have more patrons having to cross the street from Cock of the Walk and things like that. I mean, these people clearly think that that's going to occur, and you drive the area enough times, you understand why. I mean, that's because it happens, and it happens on both sides of the street, no doubt. It's not a one-sided issue, but you're going to encourage that. It's going to get worse. So, I mean, that's what you're doing if you grant them a variance to expand the use. And I'm just going by what the code says. The code says that restaurants are going to use more parking, so we're going to have more people and more cars. So we're going to make the problem worse.
I've got to agree with you. I'm very cautious about doing this. And so that's my position.
But there is, in fact, more parking on the east side of Western where this use is. I mean, we heard these same arguments when the Cock of the Walk was seeking to bring their bar into conformance by rezoning it. But it was about the people parking on the east side that were crossing Western to get to them, because most of the parking is on the east side of the street, which is where this restaurant use is.
I just wanted to address your concerns because I feel like we really have ample parking for our tenants. I understand there's plenty of parking in that north lot that would accommodate this type of business. And as stated, for the last 50 years, we've really never had a parking issue. Our only parking issue is when the tenants from the Cock of the Walk and across the street utilize our parking. We have ample parking for our tenants. The problem occurs when the bar people take, 10 plus parking, and then we don't have accommodating parking. So I feel like with the business hours of this restaurant, I really don't think it's going to affect the parking. I think we have ample parking, because if you drive down Western, like she was saying, that you don't park, you can literally back up and pull out and never enter the street. You can actually leave our parking lot. And during the day, when the hours would be, there's plenty of parking lot on that north end. And if you were to drive by there any time during the day, there's always open parking there. So there's ample space for, if the restaurant was open, there would be ample spots for them to park. It's not ever completely full. There's always ample spot for this tenant.
And I think we understand that. Here's one of the problems, though, is right now, you're operating, collegially and in cooperation with each other. If we allow the restaurant use, it's like, has already been pointed out, that opens the door to any restaurant use. And so this may be a coffee shop where, your primary traffic load is during certain parts of the day. But if we approve the variance and a restaurant is allowed and the variance is granted, it could become a lunch and dinner and an evening crowd that very much conflicts. And I, appreciate what you're trying to do and what you want to do. but I'm not going to be able to support your application. And one of the big reasons is because parking is already so tight in that area, and particularly the use for a restaurant, and the fact that we have, there's absolutely no control. You may operate there for a period of time, and then at some point, you seek another place to do business, and another restaurant comes in, and there's absolutely no control over what happens. And then you've got the other tenants whose hours and the hours of your new tenant may conflict, and I just,
Well, and here's what it really boils down to, at least in echoing Jeff's concerns, back to mine. How many spaces are we short here, JJ?
You realize there's another parking lot adjacent on that northwest corner as well, which is the church parking, and they...
Do you own that property?
We don't own that property.
Okay, so let me stop you right there. It's a church right now, and you could very well have that use right now. But that church could change hands, it could change use, it could change operators, and they could prohibit your ability to do that from that point forward, or get into a disagreement with you, and now we're losing that parking, but we have a variance that runs with this land forever once it's granted that would allow you to continue to use that restaurant.
We don't use that parking.
Which is why typically the city requires that you have these cross-access agreements in place if you're going to use it on the same property. You're not even eligible for that.
No, and that's my point, is we don't need that parking. The east properties use that parking, so we have ample space for our property.
Yeah.
We don't, that's used by the Cock of the Walk and the church.
I would say, first of all, there's like no bait and switch issue going on here. Yeah, you need to think of this as a restaurant. That's what it is. Don't think of it as like some, sort of toned down little coffee shop, whatever use they intend to make of it right now. Think of it as a restaurant. But the point is, the city is pouring enormous resources into the revitalization of this area, and this is exactly the kind of thing they want to see happen here.
Well, that's not what the code says. How many parking spaces are we short, JJ? Back to my question.
19.
19 spaces is what they're short per the
Because
ordinance.
so much of the parking in the area is on public right-of-way, and that's something that goes back to the date that the buildings were constructed.
They were zoned out of compliance.
I understand all that, but my point is you take these things that are zoned out of compliance, so they're non-conforming, and then you exacerbate that problem. You're advancing. It's progressive. It's not. You're not doing anything except making it worse.
So if this tenant doesn't go in and another tenant goes in and it's not a change of use, all that parking could still possibly be a problem. So we're not changing by denying his application. We're not changing that could potentially be a parking problem in that area. And to me, this looks like an area that should have like a zoning overlay, like downtown, something like that, where the parking counts are lowered or not required. Because what do? Do you go buy a historic house and tear it down and make a parking lot so that you can have commerce in that part of the city? That would be my argument.
My comment is I understand that parking is a substantial problem up and down Western. I'm just talking about that. It's an old neighborhood. It's built a long time ago, and comes with that are those parking issues. On one hand, you didn't have compliance because of the counting in the beginning, but that's been in place for 40 years or whatever. But on the other hand, you have a building there, and it needs a use, and it needs to be occupied and functioning as you're revitalizing all of Western. So I see the argument that we allow this to be in place because of the circumstances of that particular area that's peculiar to an area that presents itself a hardship. And somehow I would like to tie in the use access agreements being in place. I don't know how we should all make sure that's in place, but would like those assurances that that those parking spaces would continue to be in place, and whatever the variance would have to be contingent on that too.
I think if for some reason this is not approved today, it doesn't preclude another use that does not have the same parking requirements. So we're not destining this applicant to never being able to, return that building to, viable use.
No, we're not. And again, this is not because I'm trying to deny the coffee shop. It's because I can't sit here and pretend like I know exactly how this is going to develop, but I know that one element that you've failed to show to me is that it would not harm the public good. This is an area surrounded by residences. It's already got a problem. We're expanding that use. The city says you've got to have more spaces. The reason is because it puts more demand on the existing infrastructure, which is already overloaded by your own admission from your news article, and we're going to make it worse. It's been that way for a long time. I can't support it. So, I mean, unless there's additional comments that need to be made, I'm going to make a motion to deny the application.
I second it.
We have a motion and a second to deny the application. Register your vote. Ms. Powers, Ms. Lewis, you want to vote? You're not registered? Okay. I'm assuming that you are voting in opposition to the motion. Okay. Your application is denied. Good luck.
Item number 3, case number 14211, request of U.S. Employees Federal Credit Union for a variance to permit freestanding pole sign and the number, square footage, and height of signs in Tract 1 of PUD 357, located at 4301 South I-44 Service Road.
Give us your name and address for the record and speak to your application.
Michael LaForce, 4301 South I-44, Marketing Director for U.S. Employees Federal Credit Union.
Go ahead and speak to your application.
We're seeking a variance to Tract 1 on PUD 357. As it's currently written, the maximum sign height is 8 feet. The problem with that is that we're actually below grade or below road level off the I-44 overpass. So if you're southbound and you happen to look over your shoulder and look down, you really can't see where our location is, which is actually our main branch. If you're northbound on I-44, you can't see us at all. One of the things that we've been trying to do, which is important to any business, is have proper signage. And right now, with the variance, or as the PUD is currently written, the 8-foot height is just not accurate or not acceptable for what we're trying to do. And I understand back in the 80s when it was initially written, it was probably okay, because back then credit unions had very specific spheres of membership. We started out as a credit union just for postal workers. Well, now anybody can be a member at our credit union. The problem is that anyone can be a member of basically any credit union now. So competition's higher, visibility is extremely important for what we need to do to continue to grow and have visibility. And for the way we're set up right now under the current PUD, that's just not going to happen with an 8-foot sign when you're 20, 30 feet below ground level.
I have some questions. With respect to the pole signage, and you have the PUD 357, there are prohibitions in that PUD that are specific to your request for a variance. Is that correct?
I believe so. I think the maximum height being 8 foot.
Well, I believe there's a prohibition in 7.4.3 of freestanding pole signs shall not be allowed in tracts 1 and 2. So that would be in violation of your particular PUD. Is that correct?
For tract 1, yes.
And there also are some requirements on some of your other signs. I'd like you to address 744. All freestanding signs located within this PUD shall have architecturally compatible base that will blend with the development of such tract, constructed of brick, masonry, stucco, and other similar materials, and shall be landscaped with shrubs and other suitable landscaping. Would you like to address that, please?
Those are issues that will be, provided that if we were to get approval and be able to move forward with the development of that particular sign, those issues would be addressed as far as being able to match the landscaping around this particular pole sign with the main building. We're actually in the process of adding landscaping to the main building and paint and everything else, so that portion will be something that will be kind of a part of that process for approval.
Bill Fair is signed up.
My comments are this. I'm sympathetic to the fact that your PUD is not recently adopted. I'm also sympathetic, frankly, to your desire to take advantage of your location here. The problem is that PUD was put in place legislatively through a process. And for me, I can't see that the elements of a variance here are going to be met. It's going to be very difficult for you to prove those elements out. What I do know is that there is a process, probably a more proper process, that you can still accomplish this, which is by going through and having your PUD amended. And that's what concerns me, is that this is not something that I feel like we should open the door to in this way. There's a better way to do that. So if the sites have changed, if the parameters have changed, that's a great thing for the members of the Planning Commission and the City Council to weigh in on, since they're the ones who adopted the ordinance.
Let me interrupt you, and we'll let Mr. Fair go ahead and speak. Welcome. Just your name and address
My
for
name's
the
Bill
record.
Fair, 2012 Northwest Air, Bethany, Oklahoma. We originally could not believe this PUD would not let us do this. Part of this PUD, in that little corner, we can put that exact sign in there. The problem is we put a crane truck up and looked at it both sides. You still couldn't see it going northbound. But we could put that sign on their property. We're just asking that we can have it 300 feet inside track 1 instead of being at track 3, so it can be seen. To me, the hardship is you can't find this place. It's not safe when you're looking for this place. Your eyes are off the road when you're going southbound. You can't even see it at all except for about that long northbound. And you got North Pole City just right down the street that's got a big sign. It's got digital signage. In fact, when I first started working with Michael, he said, we're just south of the North Pole City. I said, well, I can find you now because everybody knows where that is, but no one knows where they are. So we're just.
Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Cravens. I think that, this is something that the PUD specifically provided for. That's a negotiated document, and I think that there is a process to amend it, and that's the process that they need to pursue. So if there's not anybody else who seeks to be heard, I'm going to move to deny this application.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to deny the application. You are not approved. Good luck.
Item number 4, case number 14212, request of Kurt Chappell for a variance to the required 25-foot side yard setback and accessory structure not behind the rear wall of the house in the RA district located at 6900 Southwest 90th.
Welcome. Just give us your name and address for the record and speak to your application.
Kurt Chappell, 6900 Southwest 90th Street, Oklahoma City. I'm requesting a side yard variance so that I can build a shop. When I bought the house, the contractor had put the septic tank right where the only spot that we could really put a building was. So part of my deal to purchase the house was for him to move the septic tank so someday I could put my 30 by 40 shop. It's really not a shop. It's more like a toy closet. But anyways, and then I found out that there was a 25, and actually it says in here 25, but the developer of the subdivision actually had requested a 30-foot variance at the time he developed the property. And with my 30 by 40 shop, I'm going to have between 15 and 19 foot between my property line and my building instead of 25 or 30. And I've talked to all the neighbors, and they're all good with it. So.
Is there anyone signed up to speak on this application?
Nobody signed up.
In reviewing your application, I saw that you referenced that a couple of the neighbors had commented that they supported it. And I mean, obviously, that if they're not here, that's a good sign that you're telling the truth.
Yeah.
So if there's no opposition or other comments, I'll just make a motion to approve this application.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second, and I'm going to ask us to cast our votes, a voice vote, since some of the lights are not working. We have a motion and a second. Register your vote. If you're in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? You are approved. Good luck.
Thank you.
Item number 5, case number 14208, appeal of Bricktown Canal Properties Bricktown Parking LLC, of the decision of the Downtown Design Review Committee regarding the denial of a certificate of appropriateness to install 3 32-square-foot Level 2 EMD signs, one at each location, pursuant to SPUD 825, case number DTCA 16-00001. The location of the signs are 137 East Sheridan Avenue, 101 South Oklahoma Avenue, and 11 East Reno Avenue.
Good afternoon. David Box, 522 Colcord Drive, here on behalf of the applicant. There is an error in your staff report. The Downtown Design Review Committee certainly takes their fair share of punches from this podium. This was not their doing. This was actually the Bricktown Urban Design Committee that ruled on this, that we now seek this appeal. Also with me is Brent Brewer, who is the property owner. We have 3 signs here. This is a very different appeal than the board is used to hearing. Typically, when you see me or other people here on behalf of applicants on an appeal, we're talking about guidelines and regulations and what's a guideline, what's not a guideline, and it's a very gray area. This is not that. This is as black and white as it comes. Mr. Cravens mentioned the legislative process in the previous sign case. That's exactly what happened here. On behalf of my client, we filed a SPUD application. It first went to the Bricktown Urban Design Committee. They're a recommending body in that instance when they're reviewing a proposed zoning case. They provided a recommendation of denial. We then went to the Planning Commission on the 3 signs. Again, a recommending body, and the Planning Commission recommended denial. By the time we got to City Council, there was a request of a meeting on me, my client, as well as some members of the Bricktown Association, a couple members of the Bricktown Urban Design Committee. And at that time, we were able to negotiate with all the interested parties and come up with a framework that we believe allowed the signs to go forward. It allowed minimal review by the Bricktown Urban Design Committee within certain parameters that were very, very detailed and spelled out. And the SPUD was approved. If you look at the language of the SPUD, it's, and I hope everyone's had a chance to read my notice of appeal. What I do is I outline our grounds, and in that I put portion of the language in the SPUD that deals with the signs. Then if you look at the end of my notice, I say that the Bricktown Urban Design Committee did not have discretionary review when hearing case number BCA-00001. They did have some discretionary review, but that discretion was limited to perhaps the color of the I-beam that the sign would be mounted on. This is an elevation of one of the 3 signs we proposed. The actual EMD portion is right here, and you can see this steel I-beam. I believe they would have the discretion to say they don't like the color, and perhaps a different color might be appropriate. Lisa Chronister with the planning staff is here to address any questions this board might have. I believe that she will confirm what I'm telling you, that there was no discretionary review afforded to the Bricktown Urban Design Committee at that hearing outside of a color on the I-beam, perhaps the orientation of the EMD. Rather than a landscape, it could be portrait or vice versa. If you watch the hearing from the Bricktown Committee, I believe it's clear that there was a disliking of the process, a feeling like their recommendation wasn't upheld, and I think that certain members had a problem with that. While I can certainly respect that position, it's a process. It's a legislative process that my client worked its way through over several months to ultimately get approval to construct 3 EMD signs. It was my take after watching the hearing that there was a hope that by casting a no vote, perhaps they could stop the 3 EMD signs. I would submit that that's not the case. These 3 EMD signs are allowed by right. If you look at the staff report that was submitted to the Bricktown Urban Design Committee, The staff recommends approval, and if you read why, they say, on the basis that the project complies with the regulation and guidelines of the Bricktown Core Development District zoning ordinance as referenced in Section C of the staff report and the special development regulations of SPUD 825. When you look at the SPUD, it's very clear what an application must meet to get approval. The SPUD being approved on or modified on February 9, 2016, under architecture, under Section 2, Other Development Regulations, says, and I quote, "Sign structures constructed within this SPUD shall comply with the guidelines of the Bricktown Core District regulations," and this is the important part, this is the only part in which we were required to go back to the Bricktown Urban Design Committee, "for material use only." The only thing before the Bricktown Urban Design Committee that day was, do the materials as applied for in the CA comply with what was legislatively approved in the SPUD?
Does the municipal counselor's office agree that they didn't have discretion?
Since the SPUD was adopted by City Council this past fall, that restricted what applies within Bricktown and changed the regulations as would apply to EMDs on these sites.
And so this board now sits as if it were the Bricktown Urban Design. It's a de novo hearing. And this board's job is to now apply the SPUD to the application that has been submitted. And I can tell you, and as I read, the staff report prepared by Ms. Chronister and her staff recommends approval only because this application for the CA complies with what was approved legislatively. I don't think I have to prove that it was arbitrary and capricious, but I think if you watch the hearing, it was. My client spent a great deal of time and effort working his way through the process, and he should have been granted approval. Luckily, we have an appeal to this quasi-judicial board, and we ask that you reverse the decision of the Bricktown Urban Design Committee. Again, Ms. Chronister is here to address any questions that you might have. Perhaps the color was the issue at the Bricktown Urban Design Committee, and so I did want to show the reason we picked that, what I'm going to call gunmetal gray, is that's the color that the city has chosen to paint on the bridge on Oklahoma as you cross over the canal. And so that's why that was selected, just to conform. It's in close proximity to this bridge. We thought it was a nice color and one that matched. One of the things in the process that ultimately led us to getting approval was we worked hand in hand with the Bricktown Association. If you read the SPUD, we donate significant time on the board. We limit the display and the content of the board to only things within the Bricktown area. So although it's non-accessory by definition, we try to make it an accessory sign as it relates to Bricktown. So the only things that can be shown on this and promoted are things within the Bricktown district. And with that, the business owners and the other stakeholders in the area were comfortable and ultimately gave us their nod of approval, and this was approved. So again, we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
When did you first start the process of trying to get these approved?
Oh, goodness. It would have been early 2015, well over a year ago. And it might have even been in 14 because there were several meetings prior to my involvement in which Mr. Johnson had made application and hearing before the Bricktown Urban Design Committee. At that time, there were two EMD sign issues working their way through. There was a 1,000 square foot application on the side of the parking garage as well as this. And both of them kept getting continued until such time that I think we decided just to push forward with it. So it could have even been as early as 2014.
Well, I think clearly the review on this is the board has been provided with all the evidence. We were provided with a complete record of the March 9th, 2016 Downtown Design Review Committee hearing. Was it Downtown Design? Anyway.
It's Bricktown.
Yes, Bricktown. It's a typo on this one. and we had the SPUD 825, and we had the video recording, and I've reviewed all of that, and clearly within the SPUD that was approved, subject to review by the Bricktown, it was clear the Bricktown was limited as to the scope and sphere of what they could review. And that it, I guess the example was you could change it from portrait to landscape or do some other things and get into the kind of design or something like that, or within that purview. I heard really no comments from them at all regarding any of the issues dealing with materials, design, or anything. I just heard the motion and it was denied. I believe, based on everything that I have reviewed, I could support a motion to reverse the decision and grant the certificate of appropriateness to the applicant.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Second. We have a motion and a second to overturn Bricktown review and find in favor of the applicants. Because the lights are malfunctioning, we'll accept a verbal vote. If you approve with the motion, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? You are approved.
Thank you.
If there's no other business before this board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second that. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.